welcome to Halfway There, episode number 34. This is the start of season 3 of the show. I've been rigorously planning and getting it all ready, and I'm excited to finally bring it to you today. My name is Eric Nevins. This is the show where we have honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. This show is going to be a good one. I'm so excited to share with you this conversation. But before we get into that, I want to let you know you can get show notes and links to anything that we talk about today at ericnevins.com. Go check that out. You can find a link to share the show. If you enjoy it today and you listen to the show and you're encouraged in any way, would you do me a favor and just share the show with a friend? Put it on Facebook, put it on Twitter. I share the show on Instagram. You can go grab that and send it out. Whatever your favorite method of social media is, it just helps get the word out. And it would really be helpful, and I would be grateful as well. Well, today, our conversation is with a gentleman. I've been telling people he met Jesus in the St. Louis County Jail. No joke. He's going to share with you that story. It is a powerful story of how God met him there and really changed his life. And the rest of his story, kind of like all of our stories, but his in a dramatic fashion, is the story of how he came to trust the Lord more deeply. You're going to be encouraged by this one. It's my conversation with Quentin Banks. Hey, Quentin, thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate you coming on Halfway There.
I'm excited about being halfway there, Eric. Thank you for inviting me, and this is it. It's very cool. This is great.
Oh, thanks. Well, I'm just we've just spent like an hour talking, and I'm excited to hear your story. But I appreciate your ability to share a story, which is cool, and I think everybody is going to really enjoy it as well. So, welcome. Why don't you, what I like to do is start out, if you just give us a brief description of kind of who you are, what you're doing now, where God has you, and then we'll go back and kind of talk through your story and see what God's brought you through.
So my name is Quentin Banks. Yes, it's okay to give my last name too. And so I live in St. Louis. Right now, the job that I have, I actually work for an incredible gentleman who is a national keynote speaker. He's a customer service expert, actually, and I am his assistant, kind of his right hand. And so he's the CEO of the company. I'm his right hand, and I help him in all sorts of ways run this amazing business that he has. And
very cool. I don't remember if we talked about this before. You're in St. Louis. Are you a Cardinals fan?
It's almost a requirement. Pretty much when you go to get your driver's license, on the application, it says, are you a Cardinals fan? You'll be denied your driver's license or your state ID if you're a St. Louis resident and you don't say yes. But
and rightfully so. I just might add.
I love the Cardinals, man.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm a huge Cardinals fan. I come from Iowa, and so we have several options. We have the Iowa Cubs there in Des Moines, where I grew up. I could have been easily a Cubs fan, which I can't imagine. But my grandfather was a Cardinals fan, so that's how I became a Cardinals fan.
Yep.
Which is it's a great tradition to have because we have 11 World Series titles, unlike certain other clubs. Anyway,
they've done some amazing things to be the incredible franchise that they are.
Yeah. Anyway, that's an aside, but I had to ask because that's one of my great passions is the birds. So great, thanks. So I want to hear a little bit about your story, and I know that so you grew up in St. Louis, and why don't you just start there and tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll get to how you met Christ.
Okay. So Yeah, I grew up in St. Louis County, a part of St. Louis County that one of the municipality where I grew up was predominantly black. It was a kind of well-known, predominantly black area of St. Louis County called Kinloch, Kinloch, and a poor area, a working class and poor people, and I was born to a single mom. My dad apparently, when he found out my mom was pregnant with me, decided to split. And but in spite of all of that, like I remember some of the things I remember, especially when I was really young. I would say before about 6 years old. I wasn't aware of the fact that I was poor.
Yeah.
And a lot of my family lived in Kinloch as well. So, I mean, a couple of, right across the fence in my backyard, my godparents lived across the fence. I could go a couple of streets over, and I had an aunt that lived a couple of streets over, and a little bit further from that, I had another aunt and an uncle. And so, yeah, I kind of grew up in that area, and life was it, it was hard, but it wasn't. But I just remember a lot of kind of good memories growing up there. I remember we had a huge backyard. I loved to play in the backyard. We had these great I can't remember what kind of blackberry bushes in our backyard, and I loved to eat the blackberries and I don't know, play with Tonka toys and Play-Doh and all of that. So and then when I turned 7 years old, my mom decided she wanted to go away to college to get a degree, and so she took me and my younger sister. I have a sister who's a few years younger than me, and we moved to Jefferson City, which is the capital of Missouri, like a 2-hour drive from St. Louis, 2 hours west
Yeah.
of St. Louis, and I lived there until from 7 to 12, while my mom worked full time, went to school full time, and raised 2 kids.
Yeah, she was busy.
pretty much by herself. So yeah, I distinctly kind of remember there was a few things that went on in my life that kind of made me the kind of person I don't know, that shaped me and kind of shaped some of the choices I made that led me to being incarcerated. And I suffered a lot of abuse from the time I was probably 6 years old. Things began to change. All of that, the happy kid that played with the Tonka toys and the Play-Doh and stuff. I remember that distinctly changing. I had suffered a lot of sexual abuse at the hands of some relatives, a lot of physical abuse at the hands of my mom, and I think I was just trying to deal with that. I was also trying to deal with a lot of the difficulty I had with even going to school, because we were so poor. I had friends who weren't as poor as we were, and kids can be merciless. And I got teased for all sorts of things, from being a nerd, being a bookworm. I love to read books. And from that to people kind of making fun of me because of my mannerisms and all sorts of things. So I remember when I went away to college, I went away to Northwest Missouri State University, and I was walking down the hallway one day. This is my first semester, probably first 6 weeks of my first semester in college, and I was walking down the hall, and somebody had left their dorm room open, and right on the dresser there on top, they had left their checkbook and a bunch of money out. And I grabbed all the money, all the cash, and I ripped out like 2 of the checks out of inside the checkbook. And I wrote some bad checks. I forged those checks and got caught on camera. Was ID'd by one of the clerks and ended up going to jail for it.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of those they'll definitely get you for.
Yeah.
If they can.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
tell us about that experience, because that must have been like frightening.
Yeah, it was. I don't remember, and I wish I could. I don't remember exactly how I knew, but I remember finding out that there was a warrant for my arrest. And I remember thinking, I don't want to be out and about somewhere and, be working or be in a restaurant or whatever the deal is and just be arrested in public and that whole thing. So I decided to turn myself in. And I think the Lord was dealing with me at the time. I honestly think that there was, I remember sensing a lot of conviction about what I had done. I didn't really grow up going to church. Didn't have an understanding of who Jesus was, and I wouldn't have described it that way at the time. But I was really, I really felt like I needed to turn myself in. And I remember opening up the Yellow Pages. This tells you, I'm dating myself here
yeah,
now.
It's a little.
Opened up the Yellow Pages.
So
I remember going.
For all the younger listeners, that was the internet before, right? It was just a phone book and had a list of people's names and their phone numbers. All right.
Yeah. So the Yellow Pages were for businesses, and so
that's
I
right.
actually went through the Yellow Pages, and I turned to the section with churches, and I called up about 3 or 4 churches, and I said, "Hi, my name's Quentin Banks, and there's a warrant out for my arrest, and I'm about to turn myself in. Would you please pray for me?"
Wow.
Because I don't know what's going to happen once I turn myself in.
What'd they say?
And some churches, I didn't get an answer, but a couple different churches did, and they said they would pray for me, and actually one prayed for me right then. And so, and I was still afraid, but I just thought maybe if I talk to people who are supposed to know God, maybe I don't know what I was thinking, honestly, but I was thinking maybe it would help.
Yeah. Well, that's so interesting.
In some way.
It sounds to me like you were, so even if you didn't have a Christian background, you knew, it sounds like God was calling you, right? He was kind of,
yes.
You were already maybe even attracted to him and you didn't know it yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe that God was real. I don't have that testimony that some people have, like, God, if you're real, show yourself to me. Mm-hmm. I believe God was real, but I had no understanding of who he was and how to be in relationship with him or anything like that. But, so I turned myself in, and I remember, Eric, just really being afraid. And the first week that I was there, I'd be in my cell, and or I'd be in a pod, what they call a pod, which is several inmates in one area, and they'd call over the intercom. And they would say, XYZ ministry is in the chapel, if you are interested in attending, let your correctional officer know, and he'll open up the door and you can go down to the chapel. And so, um, pretty much any chance that I got to go to the chapel I did. Number one, it was an opportunity to get out of my cell, and I was being drawn. I think I thought I want to go here, and I can get away from these guys for a while, and I can just go and hear about God. And so I did that. I would go down, and I would sit and open up these hymnals and sing hymns, um, and hear these different ministers come in and talk about Jesus. And I didn't respond to an altar call or anything like that. But I know probably within the first month that I was in that I'd become a believer. And the way I kind of gauge that is, I remember asking someone for a Bible. I remember asking for Christian materials. I wanted books on how to pray. I remember asking for books about fasting and things that I just didn't have an interest in before. And I began to develop my prayer life, um, kind of within a month of being in there. And and another reason I kind of say it was within the first month that I was incarcerated is because once a week we would get these free phone calls where we would could call home, and I would call. I remember calling home and saying, "Mom, there's these people coming in here, and they're telling me that God loves me and Jesus died for my sins." And I was blown away by that because I had never heard that. I thought that Jesus was Jewish and he was for Jews. I thought he was somehow connected to Judaism, and I didn't think he had anything to do with non-Jews. So I didn't understand that Jesus and had actually come to die for me. And when they were telling me, "No, he died for you, Quentin," my mind was blown. And I remember just having a real clear understanding that uh, that I was sinful, and that God. I remember it happening where I understood that that I was a sinner, that Jesus had come to die on my behalf, and trusting Him. Even though, like I said, it wasn't something where I prayed with anyone or came down front and responded to an altar call. It didn't happen like that. So
Yeah. Well, yeah. So God was calling you, but but you were definitely responding, right? I mean, you
yeah,
knew. That's awesome.
yeah. So
Interesting. Okay. So what happened next?
so I was incarcerated for a total of 15 months. For about 6 of that, I was in St. Louis County Jail. And then for about 9 months of that, and then I finally got sentenced. That's how long it took my case to kind of slowly make its way through the system, especially for a guy like me who only had a public defender because I couldn't afford, a private attorney and that type of thing. So, and then I ended up being sent to a detention center in mid-Missouri, Boonville Correctional Center, which was for first-time offenders who were between the ages of 18 and 25, or 18 and 28, something like that. And I ended up going to Boonville, and I was in Boonville for about 9 months. But prior to going to Boonville, like literally about a month before I went to Boonville, um, I I was praying one night in my cell in St. Louis County, and I had this pretty incredible experience that I credit with it being a place of where God kind of met me, and a place of growth. And so I spent about an hour every night praying. It was a big thing at the time, I think, in evangelical circles of praying for an hour, based off of the verse where Jesus says to his disciples, "Could you not pray with me for just an hour?" So somehow in my head at that point, it had gotten through to me that I could, like, spending an hour with God a day was not a bad idea. So I was doing that. And one night I was in my cell just thanking God that I knew him and thanking him for saving me and or whatever. And I had a powerful encounter with the Holy Spirit. And the only way I know how to describe it is, so picture me in this small prison cell. It's, hard cement floor. I had this little chair, this little plastic chair that I would kneel in front of. I had my Bible because I would pray with my Bible open in the chair, and I had these two flip-flops that I wore in the shower shoes that I wore that I would put on the floor to put my knees on so that my knees wouldn't hurt when I would pray, and I could stay down there and pray for a certain amount of time. Definitely an hour. And so I'm doing the same thing I've been doing for months, for weeks, months, just spending time with God usually at night and just would pray. And one particular night I'm down there thanking God, and the presence of God came on me, fell on me really strongly. And I sensed a lot of things. The biggest thing that I experienced was the peace of God, in a way that it felt like the peace of God was permeating every cell of my body. It's really hard to describe.
Yeah.
Even though I had known Jesus for a few months at that point, I honestly think if I could have been medically tested at that time, my heart rate would have slowed down. I really remember, so in addition to the peace of God that just really overwhelmed me, I felt like it was in me, on me, around me, that I was just flooded with the peace of God. But I also had a vision of God. I saw the Lord I didn't see him like as a person. I saw him as light. I felt like I was in God's throne room, and he was pure light, but there was a person there. I could see it. There was clearly some type of personhood that I could sense there, and I knew it was God. And I remember asking, approaching God and saying, "Can I climb into your lap?" and God saying yes, and him lifting me up and me resting, me putting my head on the breast of God and exhaling.
Wow.
And taking a deep breath and just experiencing incredible peace. So that's the majority of what I experienced. And this experience probably lasted, I would say, around an hour.
Yeah.
And the majority of it was this experience of the peace of God, and just feeling like for the first time in my life that I really understood what it meant to be saved. Like, I felt very safe, that I was in God, and that I was safe.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Like, what did that change in your soul? Like that. Yeah, I don't think you can have that kind of experience and not come away different.
Yeah. So I know the fruit of it was several things. Like, it changed my prayer life. It made me want to pray more. And actually, I tried to replicate the experience the next night. I still remember this. This is my first lesson in God is sovereign and we can't manipulate God. But I got down there the next night and I started praying intensely. And I was like, I want to experience that again. That was wonderful. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen. So, but I remember Jesus just being really kind of magnified. I had my prayer life ramped up. I also began to pray for other people at that point. I remember going around asking other inmates, like, do you need prayer for anything? I prayed for people for physical issues and saw them healed. I remember really sensing very strongly on myself, like the presence of God on me. It's hard to describe. At times it would be so intense though that it felt very much like electricity. And just being really aware that God was with me. And I also had a really strong sense of the second coming. Like I just thought, Jesus is coming back really soon. And that it made me cry in a good way, and it made me just really long for to see him again. So yeah.
That's probably the most unique conversion experience I've heard, but I love it. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. It's really cool, and so one of the things that happened after and experienced a lot of joy too, Eric. So there was all those incredible fruits, especially when you're a new believer. So here I am, filled with the presence of God, filled with the Spirit of God, experiencing overwhelming peace and joy and a real sense of God's nearness, a sense of expectancy. Like I would always kind of move about in my days knowing that God was near me and expecting him as I went about my day to meet other people through me. And so I got sent to Boonville, and the first thing I did was seek out other Christians when I got there. There were a lot of guys that went to church on Sundays, but there were only a handful of guys that other inmates understood and knew were the serious Christians. These were people who lived it, people who walked the walk and talked the talk. And Boonville had maybe 800 guys, something like that. And there were literally like 8 guys who fit into this category.
Wow.
And I eventually made my way into being a part of that group, actually. So, and all of those guys, I'm actually still friends with to this day. And so, some of them lived really close to me inside the facility, and we would meet and we would study together. I grew by leaps and bounds, and part of it is because I was incarcerated and I had time. I did Bible correspondence courses. I ended up signing up for through a Bible college in Iowa for Bible correspondence courses that I did through the mail.
Oh, yeah.
I studied a lot. I read a lot. I prayed a lot. I went to a lot of church because in this correctional facility where I was at, there were ministries that came in at least 4 days a week. So I went to church at least 4 days a week. And I was just hearing a lot of teaching, and I learned a lot in a short amount of time, and I grew really, really fast. The way I describe it, I kind of liken it in a weird way to a monastic experience.
Oh yeah.
But there I was with other believers in this structured facility, and there was a really strong chapel program there, and it was amazing to me. Also, I discovered Christian television, and I discovered that ministries that found out that you were a believer and incarcerated, I would write to ministries and tell them, I don't have any money, but I've seen you on television. Can you send me books about whatever?
Yeah.
And they would send it to me. So yeah, and I just grew really fast. So
yeah, I can imagine, because you were getting a lot of knowledge. You already had sort of developed the prayer pieces and the interaction with God, but then developing that sort of knowledge piece, you had a chance to do that.
Yeah,
oh,
absolutely. And learning also about just the thing of how important it was to to do it in community. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
to do it with other people. Because me and those 8 guys, we had each other's back. We would take care of each other. We would pray for each other. And it was really great to be in a place where here I am growing, and I basically can reach out, an arm's length, and I can connect with these guys all the time. And it took me a while to realize, because once I was released, and I actually eventually led my mom to the Lord, and
That's awesome.
and I realized that normally for people, their discipleship experience and their growth experience doesn't happen like that. They don't have visions. They don't, they're not, they don't necessarily, when they come to know Jesus, get an hour a day or church 4 days a week, or, that my experience and the things that I learned and the growth that I experienced, that it happens probably a lot slower for a lot of other people. So it took me a while to really understand that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. But that's an interesting piece to your growth, that you could do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so take us to the, like, what happened next? Like, what was the next sort of event?
So after I was released, total 15 months, like I mentioned, total 15 months being incarcerated. I started doing, I came back to St. Louis, got a job, and I worked. And then I joined the church and started doing prison ministry. I got connected with Prison Fellowship of Missouri. I was on fire. So I was really, I'd been that way when I was inside, and that didn't change once I was outside. I will say my family was super happy that I'd come to know Jesus, and they were really happy when they saw that it was authentic. They didn't know whether it was going to be something that was a shooting star type of experience where I would be excited for a while and then end up going back to my old ways. When that didn't happen, my sister and my mom were really happy for me, and life in many ways got a lot better. But I really wanted to share my story with other people, so I began to go into prisons in Missouri, mostly with Prison Fellowship, and do these seminars. We would go in for a weekend or a one-day event, and I traveled all over sharing my story of how I came to know the Lord while incarcerated. So did that for a while, did that for about 2 or 3 years, and then began to want to go to college, and to go back to college, I guess, and started praying about that. And I didn't know anything about Wheaton College at the time, but somebody in Prison Fellowship told me that I should apply for the Chuck Colson Scholarship at Wheaton College. And I said, okay. I looked into it. I kind of researched the school, and I didn't even know if I could get in. And so it's a really highly academically competitive school. And, the first thought in my head was, I can't get in there. And I do remember one of the deacons at my church saying, just try. Maybe you can. And I said, that was a novel idea to me, to just try. So I kind of had counted myself out ahead of time. And so I did. I applied, and there was a separate application process. I had to get accepted to the college, and then I had to go through another process to get accepted for the scholarship. And so by the end of the whole thing, I had written 6 essays, gotten 4 letters of reference, done phone interviews. I actually drove up to Wheaton and spent a day meeting with different scholarship committee members and interviewing with them. And about 2 weeks after I left, in April of '96, they told me I'd been accepted.
So
um,
how many
yeah.
of those do they give out every year?
I think it varies. I know the year that I got accepted, I was the only one. It depends on the number of applicants.
Sure.
I think is part of it. I do think there are a lot of people that aren't aware of it, and I do want to say the Colson Scholarship got started, I think, in the late '80s, mid to late '80s, by a group of wealthy Christians who really appreciated the ministry of Chuck Colson, and they wanted to establish something in his name that kind of reflected his legacy.
Yeah.
And for those who may not know, Chuck Colson, who's now with the Lord, was a part of the Nixon administration, and he was a part of the Watergate scandal. And through that, he ended up being incarcerated and coming to know Jesus. And and he began, after his release from jail, he began Prison Fellowship, which is the largest prison ministry organization in the world. In addition to that, he's a prolific writer, and he's written scores of books and has done a lot of incredible work. But these guys decided that they wanted to establish this scholarship in his honor, and they started it at Wheaton, and they made it for ex-offenders. And I'm so glad that they did it, because Wheaton's really expensive. So.
It is. It is. And
I could not have afforded to go there otherwise. And yeah.
Right, but that's part of their impact, which is awesome.
Yeah.
That's good.
So.
Okay, so you went to Wheaton.
Yeah.
Wheaton is a pretty big evangelical school.
One of the biggest.
Yeah.
It's the Harvard of Christian colleges, I think, is the little kind of unofficial
is that what they say?
Way that it's known. So
they would. I went to Trinity. I don't know if we actually have a rivalry with Wheaton or not, but I think we could start it right here.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me about your time at Wheaton. What did God do with you there?
Wheaton College. I initially came in, like, I still was the guy that was, filled with the Holy Spirit and excited about Jesus and on fire, and had done all this incredible prison ministry and everything. And now I was at this private Christian college in Northwest Chicago, and I didn't know what to expect. It turned out to be totally different than what I experienced in life up until that time. Meaning by that Wheaton's an expensive school. It's a really nice school in a lot of ways, and I want to say, kind of at the beginning, that I had bitter and sweet experiences at Wheaton. I thank God that I went there, and because of going there, the relationships that I ended up having, and the experiences that I ended up having, have just made my life would not be the same without it. And my life is richer and better because of the time that I spent at Wheaton College.
Well, go. Yeah. Maybe we're going to go there. So, but I was going to give you an invitation. So we just had this conversation, but
yeah.
Give me the short version of what that experience was like when you showed up at Wheaton. I mean, just describe the scene, because you said this was someplace different than you'd been. So explain how Wheaton is a different place, because this is suburban Chicago, right?
Yeah. So it's DuPage County, northwest suburbs of Chicago. It is DuPage County is a pretty wealthy county. Mm-hmm. Wheaton sits on about 85 acres, something like that. It's, I think it was established in 1860. I should know this as an alum.
Billy Graham went there.
Established for Christ and His kingdom, and is the slogan of the college. Started by Christians, and it's it's kind of what you would expect from a very upscale private college. Beautiful buildings, well manicured lawns,
right?
And I also became here. So here I am arriving, and I end up living in the biggest co-ed dorm at the on the campus, and I lived on a floor with about 30 guys, and I was thrown for a loop, and here's why. I was the only guy, as far as I could see. There was me and one other guy, first of all, that were the only guys on the floor who came from single parent homes. The other guys on the floor all had both parents. Most of the guys that I became friends with, guys who lived on my floor in the dorms, also came from pretty affluent families that could afford to send them to Wheaton. They had grown up going to private schools. This was the first private school I had ever been a part of. And they were pretty together. I mean, given they were 18, 19 years old. I mean, how together are you at that age? But they were pretty. They seemed pretty healthy. They seemed pretty. They didn't seem like me, and I felt in a lot of ways that me and guys that I had been friends with up until that time were broken. I was aware that I wasn't. I saw a stark contrast, Eric. I guess that's kind of what I felt when I was there. I felt like, and maybe, I mean, it wasn't any fault of the guys that lived with me in the dorm, but I felt like everybody was more intelligent, was better looking, was more emotionally healthy, more physically healthy, definitely had more money than I had. Most of my friends were getting an allowance. I worked part-time, and my mom wasn't sending me money.
Yeah.
So all of that kind of hit me. I'm like, man, this is different from what I'm used to. So that's kind of what I experienced. And I also distinctly remember the classes being really hard. So there was that.
Well, and you loaded up on them too, right?
I did. I ended up, I wish somebody had told me kind of what to do when I started college, but they didn't. And I decided to take 15 hours, which is a lot. 12 hours was considered full-time, and I did 15. And I also got involved in 3 extracurricular activities outside of class, and I also was working part-time on the weekend. So I really, I dove in, and I bit off way more than I could chew, and I paid a price for it. So my freshman year ended up being pretty tough.
You told me earlier that this was kind of a big time when, and maybe the first time, I don't know, when God was sort of no longer as intimate and close, or you were kind of at odds with him. Tell us how this experience and how that went and how you came out of it.
The spring semester, my second semester of my freshman year, I began to experience really major depression. I had a major depressive episode. I remember sleeping for 14 hours and waking up exhausted. I remember being overwhelmed by a simple, 3-page paper that might be due. I remember I can't take it, and just being kind of easily rattled by stuff. I remember my prayer life dried up. And I also remember kind of along with that, as I look back on it and kind of reflect on it, I know that it was the result of a number of factors, but one of them being because I was in this environment with these great guys, these great gals, all these really cool Christian kids, um, that I felt so much that I wasn't like them and that my life hadn't been like theirs. Um, I started seeing that there were actually dozens, hundreds of people who God had blessed with good homes, good parents, enough money, all of that. And I began to be question God, like why he didn't do that for me. And I became angry at God. I became angry at God because of the abuse that I suffered and was still dealing with the effects of that. I could clearly see my friends weren't dealing with that. Um, I was overwhelmed with all of the activities and the courses that I was going through, and so I experienced, like I said, I just experienced major depression. I couldn't. It was just hard to cope, and every day I felt like I was just really, really overwhelmed, and I had a real despair. I felt, for whatever reason, that God didn't care about me as much as He cared about other people, and I felt like I felt a real deep sense of like I. It was kind of the first time it had ever really risen to the surface in a strong way that I just became aware of how unjust um, the things that had happened to me were.
Mm.
And I began to question God and became really hostile towards God and saying like, why'd you let this happen? And give me some answers. And so it got to the point in April of my freshman year that I became suicidal. I actually wanted to end my life, and I had been thinking about it for a while, and then I made a plan, and I had a roommate, and I knew he was going home Easter weekend, and that I would be alone, and so I went to the Thursday before Good Friday. I went to the grocery store. I remember I had $50 in my checking account, and I spent the $50 buying $50 worth of sleeping pills, and got back to my dorm room, and it amounted to about 200 pills. And I remember popping them each out of the little packets onto this like piece of paper or a paper plate or something. I don't know what I had on the floor, but I kind of had them all together there. And I had a soda, and I just started scooping them up and popping them in my mouth, and by the handful, and just swallowing these sleeping pills down. And my thought was, my life's really bad, and I didn't know how to pull out of it. And I thought, I want to die.
Mm.
And so I took like 200 plus sleeping pills and laid down in my the bottom bunk in my dorm room, and I fully expected that I would wake up in the presence of God. That I didn't expect to go to hell. I didn't have that theology. I just thought, I'm gonna die, and I'll be with Jesus, and that'll be better. Um, that's not what happened. Um, I went to
Clearly.
bed. I laid down around 9 or 10 on a Thursday, and woke up maybe around 4 or 5 on Good Friday, and and I remember my mind was really it was hard to think. I couldn't think very clearly. I was really sick. I could look around on the wall beside my bed, on the floor, and all over the comforter and the sheets that cover my bed. I had vomited that night. I'd been just throwing up for who knows how long. And so, and later on, one of my friends would describe it as kind of the life of God causing all of this death to come up out of me so that I could live. But I
Wow.
do remember I do remember being in a lot of pain because I had been heaving, and I was extremely sore in my back in particular. And I think what had happened is that as I slept, my body rejected a lot of the sleeping pills, and that I threw up a lot of it. But a lot of it did get into my system, and made me really, really sick. And so I woke up on Good Friday. Um, I pulled myself together enough to call my best friend at the time, Carl, and ask him to come over. And he spent time with me that entire weekend. He helped clean me up, clean my room up, get me in the shower. I couldn't eat. I couldn't hold any food down. Didn't have an appetite. Couldn't hold any food down that weekend. I ended up just drinking a lot of water and throwing it up, and and drinking juice. And got through that weekend. I was a little more coherent by the time school resumed on Monday. But I was still angry at God. I was still depressed. I was actually angry that I hadn't died. And I remember turning to Carl on Good Friday, and I said, he goes, when he walked in, he goes, "What'd you do, Quentin? What happened?" And I said, "I tried to kill myself." And I said, "God won't let me die. I can't believe this. I'm so mad." And I said, "Carl, isn't today the day that Jesus died for our sins?" And he said, "Yeah." And he prayed for me. And Carl made a commitment to me that day that he was going to pray for me every day, until he felt like he wasn't supposed to. And so for about a year straight, Carl would either do one or two things. He prayed with me every day. He would either meet me in person and pray with me if we were on campus together, if school was in session. And he lived in California when school was out for the summer. Wherever we were, he would call me every day.
Wow.
And he would pray with me. And so then
that's a good friend, man.
It's a great friend. That's a fabulous friend. That's an incredible friend. So I really, really, I love him. The temptation to say I loved him, but I still love Carl so much. Nobody's ever cared for me that deeply, that strongly, that consistently. It's just incredible. And I thank God for him. He just really showed me the love of God at a time that I didn't even want it, and anyway, so in about September I think in September of the following year, my sophomore year, the depression began to lift, and I don't know why. It just began to wane, and I remember sitting on an empty back staircase in one of the dorms, and kind of talking to God. And I remember saying, God, I don't know why you allowed me to be sexually abused when I grew up, and I don't know why you allowed me to be so physically abused and verbally abused, and I don't know why we grew up in such painful poverty, and I don't know why I didn't have my mom and my dad growing up, and I would like to know, but the answers, God, and if you ever want to tell me, I'd love to hear, but if you don't tell me, I still trust you, I still love you, and I'm just gonna move forward, and I'm not gonna get my brain in a cramp over why these unjust things happen, because I know you love me, and I know you sent Jesus for me, and you've given me your spirit, and I'm just gonna go forward. And I honestly believe that just as powerful as that experience that I experienced when I was incarcerated, of the peace and the presence of God, and of God filling me with his spirit, I believe something just as miraculous happened in that moment on that back staircase where God gave me the grace supernaturally to just let the hostility go that I had towards Him, and to trust Him again. Because we all know people who have gone through really, really tough things, unjust things, like things that any human being living would look at and say, that's unjust. That
Yeah.
shouldn't have happened to you. And yet people allow it to become this incredible barrier between them and God, and they get stuck there. And that's where I was. And
Hmm.
God, by His grace, freed me from that. And I wasn't trying to let it go. I wanted answers. I wanted to stay mad at God. I felt like, it wasn't. It was really like a hard block of cement in my heart. This hatred and
Hmm.
this hostility towards God, and yet God graciously gave me the grace, like by His miracle working power. Really is the way I would describe it. Of being able to push that aside, and in a way that didn't mess me up, but in a way of saying, you know what? Yeah, the world's full of incredibly unjust things that I don't understand, and God is still good, and He loves me, and He's for me, and I'm going to trust Him, and
Yeah.
that's what I did on that back staircase, and
Yeah.
so
Well,
yeah,
what I love about that is that I think sometimes we can be a little Pollyanna-ish about that when we say things like that, the world
yeah,
sucks, but God is good. But in this comes out from your experience, and you had to decide not just to say the thing, but to believe it, right?
yeah,
To have
yeah,
that in your heart as true. No, God really is good, and I know who He is because you'd experienced Him, and even if you weren't going to get answers to all these things, He was still worth trusting.
yeah. Yeah, well, you know what? I mean, honestly, the thing is, I knew because of the experience that I had with God that God was the best thing that had ever happened to me, and 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 so it was a gamble in
Hmm.
some sense. Like I just had to say, you know what? Like I don't get it. Here's what I do know. I, I know that I was abused horrifically. I know that the circumstances of my life were really bad and put me at a disadvantage. They were really awful things, unjust things. And I know that God sent His Son, and I know that when His Son was glorified, that he sent the Holy Spirit and has put His Spirit within me, and I know that He loves me. He reminds me on a regular basis that He loves me.
Yeah.
And how do I reconcile those two things? Like I just basically said, and so in the middle, I go, okay, so I don't have all the answers, and that makes me angry because I think, if I were a dad, I'd do something. If I saw somebody abusing my son,
Right.
if I were a dad, I would do something. If I saw my son struggling with, clothes or shoes or stuff he needs for school and the money's not there, like if I owned the cattle on 1,000 hills, I'd sell a couple of those cattle to pay for whatever that my
Right.
son needed, and so, and I felt like God didn't do that. Um, and I didn't know why. But I had to say, okay, so on one column I've got the I don't know whys, and then in this other column I've got what I do know. And in the end, man, it's not. It just seemed like, Quentin, you're going to put yourself at a huge disadvantage if you decide to make God your enemy.
Yeah.
Like that just seems like a really bad way to kind of fix this, or to get your answers, or whatever it is that I wanted the end result to be. And so I'm like, yeah, it just, you know, Satan is my enemy. God's not my enemy. Jesus is not my enemy. So even though I can't understand everything that God does, uh, this isn't His fault.
Right.
So yeah, yeah. So
Wow. Okay.
that's how I got through it.
Well, that's so powerful. And thanks for sharing it. It's it really, you know, I'm just thinking about it. I love that moment in your spiritual walk. It encourages me to trust, even though, we all have hard times. We all have our different things, but, I got a few questions, but that encourages me to trust,
Yeah.
So,
If you have a brain and if you engage it
yeah,
even just a little bit, you have questions.
that's right. And,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if they'll ever be answered. I'm not one of those people who thinks that in eternity we'll just get everything. I think that we'll probably learn a lot about God because that's part of the beauty of him. You just can't exhaust him. And so we may always have questions that hopefully they'll change, but who knows?
Yeah.
This part of the story, I don't know. I don't know if we talked about before. Bridge the gap for me from Wheaton to today. What has God been doing with you? I know it's a big question. It's like 20 years.
Bridge,
I know.
But yeah, so
give me
I have so I've gone through a lot, and since Wheaton I've had peaks and valleys. So I came out of Wheaton really excited. Chuck Colson actually ended up being the commencement speaker for my graduation. I got to have lunch with him and the college president and the president of Prison Fellowship, and my mom and my sister were there, and it was all just really, really awesome. That whole graduation weekend was amazing. And I ended up going to work at Vineyard Christian Fellowship in Anaheim. I was an intern on staff there. I
forgot about that.
I became a part of the association of, I joined the Association of Vineyard Churches my sophomore year at Wheaton. I am a proud member of the Vineyard, and I thank God for it, and it's just been a huge part of my life. I initially thought that I might want to be a pastor, and I decided to work alongside pastors while I was there, and I learned a lot and I grew a lot in the time I was there. But I also decided that I didn't want to be a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
And
wait, so, tell me why.
Well, and maybe I have to give this caveat because this was the only church that I'd been on staff at. It might have been different if I had been on staff at another church. First of all, Vineyard Anaheim is one of the most incredible churches in probably Southern California. They do amazing outreach. They do amazing things. It's a great church. So I want to put that out first. I think part of what I saw was that that kind of made me kind of pull back a little from wanting to be a pastor was that I felt that they didn't have as much permission to be broken as I would if I weren't Pastor Quentin. And so I know one of the things that while I was there, the year that I was there, one of the things that was really cool that I got to be a part of was once a quarter, all of the pastors would come together for this night of prayer. And it was the one time kind of during the quarter where they got to be ministered to, and kind of a lot of the church leaders and kind of the pillars in the church, the more mature Christians would come, and they would spend hours praying over the pastors. And I mean, just really, really good, incredible stuff. The only time that I've never prayed in a group, intensely seeking God, praying for others, in that way, in intercession. I've done it in private, but I had never experienced it in public. And so, but that was really good. And I could tell it was life-giving for the pastors, but it was something that they didn't get often, right? They got it once a quarter, and I'm glad that the Vineyard Anaheim had it set up so that they could get it at least once a quarter. But I know that there's hundreds, thousands of churches across America and maybe even across the world where pastors don't get ministered to. They give and they have to give out and they have to give out, but there's not a place where they get something put into them, where they are ministered to, where they have people that give to them. So I saw that and I thought, well, I don't know if I want that. Like, I don't know if I want that situation. Like, because I need, especially at that time, I felt like I need help. I need a lot of help, and I need to be able to be a mess if I'm a mess, and I need to be able to have people pray for me in my mess if that's necessary. And the pastors had to be, I don't know, they had to have a certain level of of having it together. And I don't know that that's all bad, but they had to have it together. And I thought, yeah, I don't have it together, so I'm just going to put that on a back burner for a while. Because I thought, I really I did have a strong desire to serve and to minister to other people, but I thought I'll just have to do it in a different way other than having the title of pastor. So that's how that went down for me.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. I think that's fair. Yeah, I was thinking about my own experience. I wanted to be a pastor and didn't ever become one. So
yeah.
And in retrospect, I can go, yeah, that's probably a good thing for some of the same reasons that you have cited. Because it's hard. It is very, very difficult. And I don't know that most of us know what that's like and the kind of isolation that it can lead to if they don't have great relationships.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. Well, that's an aside. All right. So yeah, that I did that for the first year that I when I left Wheaton, and then I ended up moving to San Diego, and I ended up doing temp jobs. And I found out, Eric, after I did I think initially my first temp job was being a receptionist at the Jewish Community Center in San Diego, answering phones and transferring lines and signing people in and all that good stuff. And I liked that. And then I ended up becoming an administrative assistant for somebody. And I ended up finding out that I loved doing administrative stuff. I love paperwork. I love, and I loved being the guy behind the scenes, helping make an executive or a team of people look good. And yeah, I love doing all of the logistics stuff, all of that stuff, the clerical stuff. I just loved doing it. And so, ended up doing that kind of work. I ended up in Denver working, in an executive assistant position, and then, did that for many years in Colorado. And then I, eventually, moved back to St. Louis. So, which I've been back here in St. Louis since 2008. Yeah. So, been home for almost 9 years now, and glad I came back. So yeah. What do you do to minister there?
Here in St. Louis?
No, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a part of several, we call them teams at my church. So I serve in different capacities. I'm on the overhead team, so I'm the guy that, helps the worship team and the teachers during the teaching with the slides and the overheads and all of that. I'm also a part of our welcoming team, so I help new people who come into the church and also help connect them to, make them aware of the things that are in the church that could benefit them and help connect them in that way. And then I'm also on our prayer ministry team. And so, which is an important part of our church, where on Sunday mornings, we have a time during the service where people can come forward and receive prayer for whatever they might need. And, I had to go through some training and that type of thing. And we have some ongoing stuff. There's ongoing requirements to be a part of that particular team. And I pray for others up front on Sunday mornings. So, and in other settings too. So I'm part of small groups, and I pray for others in small groups and that type of thing. But yeah, that's my primary way of doing ministry is through my local church,
Cool.
that I love very much. So, yeah.
Great. Well, anything else you wanted to share with us?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
It feels like I've said a lot. I guess the big thing that I kind of think about when I look over my life, I'm in this small group now where we're talking about how to live more out of the person that God has made us to be in Christ. And one of the words that I used to cringe at when I first heard it was process. And because I still, to this day, this is kind of where I'm at with God. We still, in a friendly, antagonistic type of way, go back and forth. I so want God to fix everything like yesterday.
Yeah.
And I see so much in me today that's not like Jesus. And I desperately want it gone. And I know that I can do kind of certain things, but I know that in the end that it's got to be God who does it. And I'm still in this place of like kind of asking why sometimes and going, God, so why don't you remove that from me the way you removed it from him? Or why don't you remove it from him the way you removed it from me? Why is my sanctification taking place at the speed of mud? Why is this going so slow? And then saying, wait a minute, and actually not getting my brain in a cramp and saying, okay, I don't understand, but God, I'm going to continue to press forward with you and to walk with you the best I know how. And I'm just going to trust you, even though I don't know why this isn't happening in the way that I think it should be happening. So I'm still in a place of having to trust God. And So my biggest testimony is that I'm still here.
Yeah.
And even though I've been through a lot of hard things, that the enemy can't stop me from returning to God over and over and over again. And I'm really grateful that he's there for me to come back to, no matter how bad things get. So,
yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Quentin. I appreciate you just sharing your story with us. That was, there's definitely some key, powerful moments, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate you having me on the podcast.
Quentin, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I love that moment that you came to where you had to decide that, you know what, I can trust God anyway. And I don't have to know all the answers. I don't have to understand everything. I'm just going to trust you. That is powerful. So powerful. Thanks for sharing it, brother. Guys, I hope that you enjoyed this story. I just want to ask you, if you did, do me a favor, share the show, put it out there. This is one that I think everybody can relate to. We've all been through things, even if we haven't had the same kinds of experiences. An experience with God, like Quentin shared, is for sure guaranteed to encourage somebody that you know. So if you would, share the show, share this episode number 34 with a friend and or colleague or someone that you know. That would help out, and I'd appreciate it as well. Well, that does it for episode 34 of Halfway There. Next week, we've got another great episode for you. Can't wait to share that one. It's going to be a challenging one, and look for that next Monday. All right. Hey, guys, thanks a lot. Until next time, keep the faith.